unless someone can tackle any of these arguments, and I have yet to find anyone who can.
Hi, Dave. Hey, everyone. How's it going? Welcome back to the show. On today's episode, I'm going to be critiquing episode 415, Part of the Problem by Dave Smith. It's titled, You're All a Bunch of Socialists. It's great. Listen, go check out his podcast. I will be 100% upfront. I am very biased. I like Dave Smith a lot. I think he's great. There's a lot going on that he's handling, and he's got great rhetoric. He's got great logic. He's very quick. He's very witty. That's probably because he's a comedian, so he's able to just quickly think on his feet. And remember, this is a critique video. It's not a trashing video. I'm very passionate about economics. I love it a lot. And so I might get a bit, I don't know, uppity about it. I might get pretty passionate myself about it, but it's not to trash him. And it's not to say that everything he said is wrong. It's to give context to it and give more depth to it, to say, hey, here's the other side of that argument. Here's the other side of that page, because we read from this side. And then when we turn it over, we got to read the other side too, because fair is fair. I'll state too that it's my belief that economics is all theories. There's a lot of different assumptions which each theory and each model within those theories have, but we operate within these theories because it's what we got. It's the best we got. Okay, well, we probably can operate this way with this theory, and this is right, like mercantilism or whatever, however you pronounce it. That was an economic theory for a long, long time in regards to trade, and then it got replaced when I believe it was David Ricardo was making his economic findings on what really would propagate trade between two countries. And his models have specific assumptions as well. So you have to know those assumptions in order to properly better understand what these economists and theorists are saying about things. So I'm going to cut through this episode to try and highlight the parts and the talking points that Dave Smith makes, not to try to take it out of context, but to just highlight the thing I want to talk about so you can hear it for yourself, and then I will address what they're saying. If you want the full episode, it's free. That's how I got it. Just go on Spotify or however you get your podcast and look up Part of the Problem, episode 1415, and just watch it for yourself. It's a good watch, and there's a lot to it that I'm not going to touch on. The first good chunk of it is not economics. And if you're wondering why it's all clipped up, that's why. It's not to take it out of context. It's not to say, hey, I gotcha. It's just to highlight the actual things I wanted to address. And Dave Smith, if you're listening to this, reach out to me. I'd love to have a conversation about it, because I think you have a great foundation of conceptual understanding for economics, and I would love to talk about it. I don't really want to debate, because you believe in Austrian economics. I do too. The vast majority of neoclassical economics has a fundamental underlining of Austrian economics. However, the extreme parts of Austrian economics are left out because they don't work. Just like you said, socialism doesn't work in practice or in theory. Austrian economics, on those extreme left and rights of its belief systems, doesn't work even in theory. Or obviously, if it's not in theory, it's not going to work in practice. And I might get into that in this video. You can do it yourself as well. You can look it up and read how a government would function if it didn't have taxation, if there was just no taxes and there was only a land tax, because that's an extreme wing of Austrian economics. And I'm not saying Dave Smith is that extreme wing. I don't know exactly where he sits yet within Austrian economics. I just know from watching this video that he is of the belief of Austrian economics, which is a great place to be, because that is kind of like the baseline of all economics. And then it gets tweaked and modified as we go up, as we build on it.
He talks about wealth taxes and all this other stuff. You can run. It's like a math equation. You could go run this. It's like if you hold on. Let me see. I'll see what AI tells me right now. Okay, total wealth of all U.S. billionaires. Total wealth of all U.S. billionaires combined is between, according to the AI overview on Google, is between $8.1 and $8.2 trillion. So, in other words, if you confiscated all of the wealth of every single billionaire in the country, just took it all, not a tax, not their income, just took all their shit, took everything they have, you could pay for about a year of what our federal government spends. There's no conversation about Oh, and by the way, you don't have billionaires anymore. You just completely destroy your economy.
Okay, so his first thing that I picked out that is kind of addressable is the idea of this wealth tax stuff, where we want to tax billionaires. And his example is, if you were to take all the wealth of all the billionaires in America, it would pay for America for like 1 year. And I believe his point is that that's not going to solve your problems. You have to reduce spending. And that's true. You do have to reduce spending. You can always spend more than you can make. The United States government is living proof of that. But what I would argue is that it's a poor example, because I can eat more if I eat the eggs that a chicken lays than if I kill the chicken and eat it. That's the kind of example he's giving. He's saying, well, if you just destroy all the billionaires' wealth, yeah, you'll have that $8 trillion or whatever, but then it's gone. Same sense of, if I kill the chicken and eat it, I no longer get eggs, and I can eat a lot longer and have more food by eating the eggs of the chicken than by killing the chicken and eating that. So that's the kind of example he gave there. But I think his point wasn't to actually solve the problem behind the deficit or the debt, but to say that the government is overspending, and any amount of spending is just, we got to cut it back. And I agree. The United States government spends way too much money. Now, what I would say too, when you're looking at these kind of things, because of the United States' special position in the global economy as a reserve currency, the amount of US dollars out there and the amount of wealth in America, this is, again, another theory by modern monetary theory, where they say the total wealth of America is kept tallied by the total debt of America. Since America is the issuer of currency, everything that it's issued is the total wealth. It's operating in the private and public sectors within, and it doesn't want to bring all that back in. It's a huge theory that I'm not going to get into because I don't have time. And I know maybe 2/3 of that theory completely, and I don't study it actively, so I'm not going to pretend that I do. But there is a theory out there. It's called Modern Monetary Theory, MMT. Check it out if you want. There's quite a few books and stuff on it. Anyways, I would say if you're going to try to measure the total wealth of America, you would have to take into account all of the international trade that is denominated in USD as well. Not just the petrodollar, all international trade. It's massive, because the United States dollar is used globally. Yes, there are currencies that don't use the US dollar or are trying to get away from it because they don't want the controls that the US government puts on them when they do something that the US government doesn't want. Sitting from American point of view looking out, you say, whoa, why don't you want to do what our government wants you to do? I can understand from another country's perspective saying, hey, I don't want you to freeze my funds just because I'm doing something that is in the best interest of my country, but not in the best interest of your country or your perceived interests of this country, that country, whatever. That's all foreign policy and global foreign politics and whatnot. But the basis of this argument I find lacking, because in the same sense of the chicken example I gave, I can eat a lot longer with eating eggs from the chicken that the chicken lays than if I kill the chicken and eat that. And that's essentially what he said, is like, you destroy the billionaire wealth, you consume it for 1 year, and now you're starving. And it's like, well, that's the point of the wealth tax that people are trying to push. There are some that want to tax the wealthy into oblivion. I don't believe in that. That doesn't seem right by many measures and many different perspectives. I think it's anger that drives that. But to tax them more and to change the effective tax rate of these multi-billion-dollar corporations and individuals, and even trillionaires, because we have a trillionaire now, I think that would be more effective than just, hey, let's tax them into oblivion. Let's just actually try to create an economy that works for everyone and not just a select few, or not just those that are in the know, and just create an economy that can actually function for the long term and not just gassed, record highs, but crumbling roads and crumbling societies and communities. So, and you might want to say economics is just money and dollars. And I would caution you from thinking that way, because all finance is economics, but not all economics is finance. The premise is that economics is very encompassing and finance is just one piece of it. And all of the finance is part of economics. It's how we, trade and whatnot. So hopefully just kind of keep that in mind. And remember too, there's a lot of theories in economics. All of economics is theories, and all of economics, it's a squishy science. It's not a hard science. It will never be a hard science, because you're measuring humans, and you're measuring utility from humans and what they value in that utility. For example, in math, you can do 1 + 1 = 2. It's always going to be true. right? 1 + 1, if you just have one with just one, no fancy math things, it will always equal 2. I cannot do that in economics. I cannot always say Fred will always get this amount of utility from this purchase of this product every single time, and Susan will also get this amount of utility every single time. It's just not how it works. Fred might say, I don't want this anymore, or I've had this for years and I don't like it anymore, or now that I've got more information and it's actually not good for me, but I didn't know earlier, now I don't buy it at all. And Susan could be the same way, or maybe she finds something new about the product that she used to like and got 10 utility out of it, and now she loves it and gets 20 utility out of it and is willing to spend much more. My point being, without getting too deep into it, is that economics is a soft science, a squishy science, and it will always be that way. And just be careful listening to people who say, no, it will always be like this. There are aspects of economics that are harder than others, like finance. Finance is a much harder part of economics than economics, broadly speaking.
But he's invoking this here for a reason, and it's like, we never even did what Milton Friedman said we should do. Like, our camp, my guys are like, no, like Mises and Rothbard are the more like hardcore guys. To us, Hayek and Friedman were a little bit more watered down. But the idea that we ever did any of that stuff is just not true. It's ahistorical. It's not true. And it's verifiable. You can go check it. Which year did Ronald Reagan cut spending? Oh, wait, it increased every year? Okay. All right. So this wasn't a laissez-faire period in time. And so, and part of the thing that's so dishonest here about this framing is that, look, again, this is just objectively, this is the history of America. Anyone can look this stuff up.
Okay, so Dave Smith's claim that we didn't even do what Milton Friedman wanted us to do is not entirely true. So no, we didn't reduce government spending, and Milton Friedman was big on that. And he thought that government was like a hidden tax, or the ultimate kind of tax, government spending. Now, we did do a lot of what Milton Friedman actually wanted as well. Milton Friedman brought about monetarism. We do that today. That is how the Federal Reserve operates, is off of different principles from Milton Friedman. Additionally, we do shareholder value. Additionally, the vast majority of our corporations in America think shareholder value is the way to go. So we did a lot of Milton Friedman. We did too much of his economics. It's why we are where we are. Because Milton Friedman believed that if companies focused on maximizing profits, that it would increase the welfare of the state. And welfare isn't welfare like most people know it, where it's like, hey, I'm going to go apply for welfare. In economics, welfare is the overall well-being of that economic system. And so we're categorizing them into countries right now. So the welfare of America. Milton Friedman believed that the welfare of America would be increased if corporations focused on profits, because profits could be pushed into shareholders to increase shareholder value, which would then reap from the benefits of the corporations. He also believed that corporations, their incentive, if it was for profits, would be the best and most efficient way to allocate resources. We did a lot of what Milton Friedman said we should do. He was listened to. Yeah, we didn't do everything, but you can't say just because you didn't do everything. Say you have a 3-point list and you do point 1 and 2, but not 3. It's, well, I guess we're just not going to do the list. We did the list. We did most of the list. We just couldn't get to 3. And in my opinion, the third point of reducing government spending, that was probably the more important one. We probably shouldn't have incentivized businesses to just maximize profits, because look at where we are now. Look at what we're living in now. This is because of that rhetoric by Milton Friedman. So I disagree with you, Dave Smith. I like you. You're a great guy, but I disagree with you. I would also point out the rhetoric that Dave Smith is using. It's amazingly strong. I do this with the other videos, like with Joe Rogan Experience, and how people are framing things and talking. And I don't think Dave Smith is doing it to try to trick you. It's just his belief system. It's just what he believes right now. And so that's why he's saying it's objectively true that we didn't follow Milton Friedman's advice. It's not. And I have looked it up. And I research this stuff. I go to school for this stuff. I love this stuff. It's amazing. I read about it even when I'm not in school. And we did parts of it. It's not so cut and dry. We did do a lot of it. But the maybe most critical piece of reducing government spending, no, we didn't do that part. We did the opposite of that part. We spent more. And that is what a lot of little side bit here, a lot of Austrian economics kind of advocate for a hard currency that you can't manipulate at a state centralized level to reduce inflation or the impacts of inflation, or even get rid of it at all. It just depends on what economists you're talking to and what they believe about it, because the idea is that governments print money, and they do, and it creates inflation, and it does. The idea is that you can have a hard currency to combat that. And I do believe that as we are now, we're past that capacity to go back to a hard currency to stymie inflation. It's a fail-safe kind of idea where it's like, hey, you just can't make more gold if you had a gold-backed dollar. But we have so many dollars in the system now, not just in America, in the whole globe. There are so many USDs floating around that if we were just like, hey, we're switching over to gold, you can turn in a dollar for... If you turned in a dollar for gold back in the day, I don't remember exactly what it was, but you used to be able to turn in United States dollars 4 ounces of gold. If we did that now, because of the sheer volume of dollars in the system, you could get like a 0.0001 ounce of gold, maybe. There's too many dollars for that type of a system. I'm not saying there's too many dollars in general. I'm just saying there's too many dollars to go back to a hard currency system as it is now. There would be a lot of reworking that we would have to do, a lot of burning of the currency as well. But Milton Friedman brought us monetarism, which is used now in the Federal Reserve, that Austrian economists want abolished. So he's very well known, very well respected as an authority figure in economics. And Dave Smith's claim of like, we just didn't listen to him, we didn't even do what he wanted at all, it's objectively true. No, it's not. We did do the vast majority of what he wanted. Maybe not everything, but that's how life is. It's not so cut and dry.
Relatively speaking, if you're talking about the government, back then, the old American way, the government is about this big. And if you're talking about even the 1980s, the government is about this big. That's just the reality. And so trying to like spin it as like, well, we're not going back to the 80s. We're going even more hardcore America than that. I mean, again, like let's be objective here. Alexander Hamilton believed in economic development. Okay, that's kind of vague, J.D. Vance. For you to have the economy that Alexander Hamilton had.
Yeah, so Dave Smith is pointing out something really critical here, and I agree with him on this, and I think it's missed by a lot of people, and I also think it's purposely used by politicians because they honestly don't give a crap about the American people. They just need to change their messaging. Oh, you don't like what I'm saying? I will continue to do the same thing. I'll just say it in a different way, and then we'll try. No, still don't like it. I just got to change it. I just got to change the messaging. That is literally the playbook, is to change the messaging. You don't necessarily change what you're doing. You change the messaging. And what Dave Smith is pointing out, rightly so, and I agree with him, is that the government, the economy, America in general was vastly different during Alexander Hamilton's period in time than today. And I think we can all agree on that. But what J.D. Vance is doing is he's appealing to authority of the past, of great leaders of the past and stuff. It's an appeal to authority to say, hey, we should do this because great leaders and great people in the past have done stuff. But again, J.D. Vance fails in this because, I mean, I have a very low opinion of J.D. Vance. I do not care much for that guy. He is just like Kamala Harris, in my opinion, just a gust in the wind. He's just a windsock. The wind's blowing this way, I'm a never Trumper. Oh, the wind's blowing this way, I love Trump. I'm actually his vice president. That's J.D. Vance in a nutshell. Not to be trusted. That's what you call a chameleon. Those are snakes. A snake may shed its skin. It's still a snake. Like it doesn't matter that he changed sides. He's still just this wishy-washy guy. So anyways, I just wanted to point that out. I agree with Dave Smith on this, is that it's really important to keep in mind what we're talking about in context.
Currency also allows you to economize, right? Having a store of value is important because as I'm sure you can figure out, right? Like if I'm a farmer or something like that and I want to buy a bed from you, you may not need chickens, or you may not need eggs, but you need dentistry. And I'm not a dentist. I don't do that. But instead of me having to go to the dentist and be like, hey, will you give this guy dentistry if I give you eggs because he doesn't need eggs? It's better if we just have one universal store of value so we can all trade. Just accelerates trade and it allows us to all be much wealthier than we would otherwise be without it.
Okay, so what Dave Smith is talking about is called the double coincidence of wants. And it's one of the major failures of the barter system where you have to have, coincidentally, the same thing that someone else wants that you also want. Like, oh, hey, I have eggs. I want shells. And hey, I have shells and I want eggs. Great. barter works, when that double coincidence of wants, sometimes called the double coincidence of needs, either way, it's talking about the same thing. But when that fails, trade in a barter system fails. And then you would have to go trade for something to find something. And that's what Dave Smith is getting at, is the double coincidence of wants is bad, and currency is important because it allows you to facilitate trade, because it's an agreed upon unit of value, that currency. So you can just say, hey, I have $1, I want your eggs. I have $1, I want your shells. And then you let prices work out between supply and demand, how much something like that is worth. And not just supply and demand, but also labor, which he will get into in a little bit.
Then comes prices. Well, prices are something that are always organically developing, evolving all around us. We all experience this all the time. If any of you have ever sold a house or a car or a bike or whatever, it's a dance when you figure out prices, because there's a lot of different information, and then there's also individual will. People get to make choices. And this is what Mises was all about. This is what praxeology is all about, the study of human beings making choices about things.
Okay, so Dave Smith is talking about prices, and I agree with him. The vast majority of economics and different economic theories use prices as information signals, and that the more we leave them alone, the more accurate information we can get. Doesn't mean that it's right, that it's good. It's just that information is more accurate. There's a lot of manipulation with prices, even in America. A lot of people like to think of price floors and price ceilings or price setting as the only ways that you can manipulate a price. It's not true. Subsidies manipulate prices when you subsidize an industry. I would say quotas and tariffs, there's more, but those also manipulate pricing and change what that information signal is telling you and what you can infer from it. So very important to keep that in mind. And again, he's not really making a claim outside of just that, hey, this is what I believe prices do. And the vast majority of economics agrees with that. There are some that believe you can have price controls, you can set prices, and you can have kind of a command economy from a centralized hub of government. As a very classic example is the Soviet Union, and how it crashed because they just couldn't, they had to set prices for everything, and they just couldn't keep up with as an economy grows in size. It would just be impossible, in my opinion. Anyways, great point.
In fact, I think, definitely Karl Marx and Adam Smith both built their theory off of the labor theory of value, or at least both subscribe to the labor theory of value. I think Marx is really, it's amazing how much weight there is on top of the labor theory of value for communism and socialism in general. And they're just wrong. It's just wrong. It's just like it's in the same way that you would read, like, before they figured out germs, people in Europe used to believe that viruses were caused by the clouds. And then they figured out that was wrong. That was just wrong. It's not even like, there's not even like a debate anymore between like, hey, is it these germ things, or you think it's the clouds? It's like, no, it's not the clouds. That was wrong. It was a guess. It was an incorrect guess. Same with the labor theory of value. That is not, the labor theory of value essentially argues that value comes from the labor that was put into it. And again, I'm not saying Adam Smith or Karl Marx were dumb people. You can kind of understand why someone might have viewed that at the time, because, like, obviously those two things don't have no relationship, right? Like, you work and you get paid for working, and when you work and you produce something, that did have something to do with the value being created.
Okay, so Dave Smith's talking about the labor theory of value, and I believe he'll get into value being subjective and whatnot. So his take on it is it's just wrong. It's just wrong. I disagree. There is a mix, though. Both things can be true. Value is subjective, and also value can be derived by labor. And here's a classic mischaracterization of labor being the equivalence of work, and that just because work was performed, or even if labor was performed but inefficiently, that added value of labor makes the product or the service more expensive. That's not what the claim in the labor theory of value is, but that is what Austrian economics will tell you to disenchant you from the idea of the labor value or labor theory of value, LTV. Both are true in reality. Value being subjective and the labor theory of value their value is derived from labor. Both are true. It is not a matter of this one's true and that one's not. And that's tricky with economics, because you'll find in some cases where the LTV is very prevalent, and you'll find in other cases where it's not prevalent at all, and subjective value is pretty much guiding the whole thing. And what a good example of a subjective value market would be a speculative market, like parts of the stock market where the fundamentals of a company are trash. Let's use SpaceX because it's in the news and everything. The fundamentals of SpaceX are garbage. It's not a profitable company. And yet the price initially skyrocketed because there was a ton of speculation on what this thing was going to be. And if you look at it now, I think the latest I saw, it got up to 210 per share. And now it's at like 135. And the market is correcting through prices, right? Information on this speculation of this perceived value of, I think a single share of SpaceX is worth $150. Well, this other guy could say, well, I think it's worth 135. Buyers and sellers, a buyer for every seller, a seller for every buyer kind of situation. So it's not that they're just wrong. And I wrote this down because I don't have it memorized. But one definition of the labor theory of value, I'm just going to read it off in my notes. Labor theory of value. The economic value of a good or service is determined by the total amount of socially necessary labor time required to produce it. Now, this includes utility value and exchange value, but one of the most important terms there is the socially necessary term. Let me explain this. Is the socially necessary value, or the socially necessary labor time required, is the average, I wrote this down too, the average time of work for the average skill using average tools under average conditions to produce a good or service. Just because it took you 10 hours to make something doesn't mean it's worth 10 hours of labor. This is something that the Austrian School of Economics, I believe, purposely ignores because it makes the labor theory of value look bad to just ignore that part and just be like, oh, they just think all labor is equally worth everything. No, that's not what we believe for this version of economics. We believe that only average and effective labor needs to be counted. So his example, I'll try to find it, where you pick up a rock and throw it on the ground. It conflates labor with work, expended, energy, right? But whatever, because in my opinion, a robot producing a shirt from a sewing machine, say you got a sewing machine, you make it fully robotic, that produces a good. That is extremely valuable. And that's not labor, it's capital, but it's, Marx would say that that's all the stored labor from the engineers and the scientists and stuff, and it's dead labor, so it's really cool. It's really interesting to kind of think about these kind of things and say, well, should that shirt that robotic sewing machine made be valueless then? Can no one find utility value in that? Can there be no exchange value either? Can someone not have subjective value and go, well, hey, I wear that shirt, looks good, fits right? To say that that's not true at all. Yeah, so I'm mixing labor theory of value and subjective value here to show you how hard it is to separate them sometimes. He brings up Karl Marx and how theory of value is doing a lot of heavy lifting, and I believe it is. He used it as a critique against capitalism to say, if you have a worker who works 8 hours and they cost $100, but they produce something worth $150, that $50 is surplus labor value.
Karl Marx or Adam Smith never would have claimed this to be the case, but it is useful in just disproving the whole theory, right? If you go outside and you lift up a boulder over your head and drop it, and then you do it again and again and again and again and again, and you do that for 15 hours straight, you've put a lot of labor into something. You've worked awfully hard, and the value is zero. There is zero value there. So clearly it's not the labor alone that is creating any value.
Okay, yeah, he just used the boulder analogy, and we talked about it a little bit earlier. And yeah, it's just, I get the analogy. It's a conflation between labor and work, and like expended kinetic energy and stuff like that. I agree that you can have examples of where labor does not create value, but that's not the argument from me. The argument is that it's a mischaracterization of LTV. LTV acknowledges that, and they say, hey, just because you spent 10 hours making a scarf doesn't make it worth 10 hours of labor at that going rate of labor for making scarves. Maybe you're exceptionally bad at making scarves, and that scarf is trash. It could be a 50-hour scarf. It's still only worth nothing because no one wants it because you did a bad job. The labor theory of value is not arguing that, no, that scarf still has value. It is not arguing that. And so that's why I highlight this is the mischaracterization that Austrian economics takes towards the labor theory of value. Labor theory of value does not argue that. Additionally, I'd like to point out that the vast majority of modern economics globally adheres to the Austrian economics point of view on subjective value. The vast majority of it. In my opinion, you can see how that goes wrong because we have so many speculative markets, especially here in America. They're nothing. And then tons of people lose out on money. And there's a lot of collusion. And I'm thinking of poly market. Yeah, it doesn't work out the way theoretically you believe it would when taken to the extreme. Neither of them do. And that's why both of them are true, but are balanced between each other. There is value in labor. And he's about to make a point for that, a case for it, I think, without realizing that he is. And it's when he talks about apples. So what Adam Smith was looking at, and David Ricardo and so many other economists, is that they were trying to find what the most like basic fundamental input into something to add value to something else. So say you have a piece of metal and your labor turns that piece of metal into a piece of jewelry, and it's your skill, your knowledge, your hands that did that. And for back in 1776 with Adam Smith and all that, that's what they were trying to figure out is, hey, let's try to strip everything else away. What is actually creating value? And that's where the labor theory of value comes in. And that's why a lot of it does mesh with Karl Marx on the surface, but when you start to go in deeper on it, Karl Marx said that a lot of that stuff was like stolen wages from excess production. It disregards capital, Karl Marx. The answer is probably somewhere in the middle with balance, right? Anyways, I just wanted to point that out because it's hard to hold all these ideas in at once and try to explain them. And that's why if you're watching Dave Smith's podcast on this, he's kind of skipping around, as I do myself, because it's a lot of things to hold at once that are in agreement and also compete against each other, and you're trying to use the correct verbiage. Again, too, I have the benefit of the pause button. My video is an edited video, so I can stop, think about what I want to say, throw in an extra piece or chunk, or delete something that I stumbled over, as we all know, and to just keep that in mind. Because myself as well, I love economics and I study it and I read about it, and there's so much to it that it is, with this video alone, we're not even talking about specific cases and corporations and countries. We're talking about just the fundamentals, the theoretical side, the philosophical side of economics, which is extremely intriguing. I love it. It's also great. It's all good. All of it is good stuff. You should study economics. It's good for you.
And there was some of the classical economists. I think there was one. I think they called it the diamond water paradox or something like that. But so you could say right now, a diamond ring. If I said what's more valuable, a diamond ring or a bottle of water, almost anyone with any sense would say, well, the diamond ring is worth a lot more. Let's say that's a $10,000 diamond ring. That's a $2 bottle of water. But now let me ask you again, on a desert island. On a desert island, that bottle of water's value is going to shoot up, and the diamond is going to go to damn near zero.
So what Dave Smith is talking about here is the diamond water paradox, which is actually, I believe it was popularized by Adam Smith in 1776. And it's talking about consumer choice, really, and utility. What kind of utility do you get out of things? And his example there shows, well, the utility of water, because it's so abundant, we can use it for low utility and high utility. You use water to shower with and to drink and to cook with. Those are high utilities. You get a lot of consumer satisfaction utility out of that. Whereas you can also use it to water your lawn and hold water in an aquarium for fish, because while those are lower utility, there is such an abundance of it that, hey, I can use it for whatever I want. While diamonds don't really have much utility, but they are scarce, right? So this gets to supply and demand, consumer preference, and consumer utility in a good or service. That's what the diamond water paradox is talking about. And he highlights, hey, now the utility of water has shot up because you're on a desert island, whereas diamonds are kind of worthless on a desert island. You can't really do much with them, whereas water will keep you alive. The utility of it. right? And he also maybe unknowingly put in scarcity as well, because when you're in a regular society with plumbing and all that, the scarcity of water is low. There's lots of water, right? The scarcity of diamonds is still pretty high, and also the utility of diamonds is still pretty low. So it's things to keep in mind when you're talking about supply and demand and consumption and utility and consumer preference, the elasticity and inelasticity of goods and services. All that has to be thought of. And when you give examples, you want to try and keep them all the same so you can really highlight why this is happening. Like, what are we looking at? And a lot of people will criticize that to say, well, you're making all these assumptions that are not realistic. And that's true. You've a lot of economic models do that, not because they're trying to say that those assumptions are real, but because they are trying to hold them still so they can look at one little thing and go, wow, that's why that's moving. Let's adjust one assumption and see what it does. Does it go up, down, expand, contract, whatever? That's how a lot of economic models in the very beginning days of economics, and even modern economics to an extent, function when you don't bring in things like variable calculus and whatnot. So just wanted to highlight it. That's the point of the whole water and diamond paradox that Adam Smith came up with way back in the day.
Okay, so what that kind of shows you is that value is subjective to you. You, depending on the place and the circumstances and the timing, you might value other things. Why is it that LeBron James makes whatever $40 million a year or whatever he makes, and somebody who's like the best player at cricket can't even make 10 grand a year in America? It's because people value that one. People want to go see LeBron. They don't necessarily. Sometimes it feels arbitrary. Like sometimes it's not completely arbitrary. The water on a desert island, that's because of a very real human need for survival and for water. But like sometimes it's even just arbitrary. People just like one thing more than the other. And as we've seen, as you could see if you just look around anywhere, that is actually how value is generated.
Yeah, so Dave Smith's talking about value being subjective, and it is, but it is also labor can add value. There are value-added processes that can only be done through labor, whether that's machine labor and you believe in the dead labor theory or not. That's Marxist theory as well. But what I think, I disagree with Dave on this, because what I think he's trying to do is to say there is only one source of value. And I would love to have a conversation with him, or really anyone, about how do we get to the fundamental unit of value. And that's where Adam Smith and whatnot were saying, well, it's labor. That's the fundamental starting unit of value. Whereas Austrian economics will say, well, it's all subjective. And I gotta say, it's probably both. I think it's a mix of both. And if you have the one extreme of Marxism where it's all labor and that's it, I don't believe that, because there's all sorts of like other things that add value that you couldn't have added that value to that height or extent if you didn't have that capital good to create that thing. And you go, well, that's just stored up value from the people who made that capital good, and it's just being expended per unit used. And that's a good argument, all right? That a lot of people go with that. And same with Austrian economics, where it's like labor has nothing to do with anything and everyone just values things differently. And that's also a good argument, because this is where economics gets tricky, because it's squishy. It's not a hard science, it's a soft science. It always will be. And you got these really strong arguments about how, hey, I look at this picture and I value it for $1 million, and someone else looks at it and is like, that's stupid. Why would you do that? That's worthless. That picture is worth nothing. I will never buy it. I will never value that picture. Art, I suppose, is a good example of that kind of stuff, of subjective value. Yeah, I'm not here to try to disprove it. I'm just here to try to give a counter argument about why people believe things in other ways. Dave Smith has good points on this, because he's pulling from principled, fundamental Austrian economics, which the vast majority of economics today is built on. There are extreme camps, like I said, like Marxism and communism, that disagree with this. And I'm not entirely sure that socialists agree with Marxists wholeheartedly. I think they are a tweak to it. Just like there's Austrian economics as a good foundation, there are tweaks to it, because they saw this doesn't work in real life. We have to adjust this part. And so they did, and then they did, and then they did, and then it was neoclassical economics, and then it was liberal neoliberal economics and all sorts of things. So it's important to keep that in mind. It's difficult because then you can't just have these hard, surefire solutions, which is what everyone wants. But you're being more honest, I suppose. And I guess it's a measure between should you be more honest or should you just be more concise? Which do you value more? I want to say, too, in defense of the labor theory of value, there are things that add utility to necessities that were only achieved through labor, and that whether at the given point in time you value it much or not, and let's stick with water, say you're not thirsty and you're surrounded by an abundance of fresh water, there are investments of labor into capital that create capital goods that allow for less labor to be expended per unit produced, that allow for basic necessities like water to be abundant, and thus bringing down a perceived subjective value of them. Only possible by bringing that down was the investment of labor into them initially. If you can follow along with that, tell me. It's just something I came up with now because it kind of makes sense, but let me know in the comments if you're like, what are you trying to say? So I can refine it to try to better explain why labor does hold value. It is not the end-all be-all value, and subjective value can take an end-all be-all position in people's decision-making. They can just go, I love that, I'm gonna buy it no matter what, I need that. There are people that will do that. You can't do that all the time with just goods produced by labor. I guess my argument would be is that everything is produced through labor. This is where I get on the side of Adam Smith with this, is that no matter if you trace it back and back and back and back, labor is a part of all things that are not just, I found a stick on the ground. I value that stick. Cool. But we're not living in an economy of sticks and rocks. Labor is a part of every piece of our economy. How you want to measure that labor, different question. That's where a lot of different economists, agree and disagree. To say that value is only subjective, I gotta disagree on the extreme end of that, because you have labor inputs into everything. Everything has labor in it. And so you are subjective. Your subjective value is based on what the labor is. There it is. I finally got there. Your subjection of value, while there is an item like a book that you're appointing value to, I value that book at $5, I value that book at $0. What you're really valuing is the labor that was put into that book. There it is. That's my strongest argument for the labor theory of value, LTV, is that you're valuing the labor. Your subjective value is subjective to the labor. That's what it is. This is just a medium. This is just a medium in between. You got your subjective human utility, convenience value measurement, and you got the labor that was put into the item. Human labor. Let's just stick with human labor. And that item is kind of the barrier that creates all this fuzz and static in between. You're looking at the item, and the people producing the labor are looking at the item, and the item is the holder of value that is being discerned between these two points of view. But subjective value is looking at the value of the labor. And some people will say, hey, that painting is worth $1 million, because while you're looking at the painting, your subjective value is discerning the value of the labor in the painting. and you're saying, wow, that artist, whew, they did it good. While another person can go, I don't value the labor that was put into that painting. It's worthless. So this is where I'm saying, like, both are true. They have to work together. It is not that LTV is absolute, and it is not that subjective value is absolute. They work together. That is the reality. And if we can look at that and start to figure out how that affects our economy, then we can come up with probably a really effective economy.
There's apple trees all over. It's a whole island of apple trees. So much so that there's just apples on the ground and there's apples everywhere. What's the price of an apple going to be? What's the price of an apple going to be? Okay. Very cheap. Very, very cheap. Next to nothing. Now, let's say you're on a desert island, there's no apples, and in order to get an apple, someone has to go on this adventure where they risk their life and they have to go on this little rackety boat through the very rough waters, and there's a good chance, 50-50 shot, you're going to die before you come back with an apple. What's the price of an apple going to be? Very, very expensive. Nobody's going to even think about making that attempt unless you just pay them you give someone $10 million, maybe they'll risk their life to go try to get you an apple, but you're not getting it for cheap.
All right, I don't know if Dave Smith realizes that his Apple example is more of a labor theory of value pro than it is a con. He says right in it, hey, what is the price of an apple if there's apples just all around? Low, right? Because there's no labor involved in getting them. But if you go get an apple and you have to make a dangerous trip, you might lose your life. There's a lot of labor in that, a lot of risk as well, which Marx doesn't account for as much, in my opinion. He doesn't give it as much importance. There's risk and there's labor in there, and you get that apple. Well, you're probably going to pay $1 million, he says, or something along those lines. So that is an argument for the labor theory of value. And it's ironic, and this is why I highlight it, not to dunk on Dave Smith, but to say, look how they're intertwined, how you can't get away from one or the other. Your subjective value on something is based off of the amount of labor put into it, at least in the examples that we're using today and that we're seeing today. So this is part one. There'll be a part two, because this is near the end of this podcast is when you really got into like the meat and potatoes of it. And again, I would love to have conversations with people about these things. I'm extremely passionate about it. I don't necessarily subscribe to one camp or another of economics. I'm just trying to take in as much of them as I can and shelve things that I don't agree with now, but I can revisit later as I learn more and think about it more, I suppose. But again, too, a little shout out to Dave Smith is that, hey man, if you do want to have a conversation about this, I would be more than happy to. I would love to, because I think what you're doing is great and you have a strong understanding and base in economics, but it does seem lacking in spots. And I would be more than happy to have a conversation with you. So when you run into the rhetoric of neoliberal economics, which is your standard course of economics right now, and neoclassical, your points on economics don't seem as strong, and I would love to have a conversation about it to try to shore up where they're at. So if you like this kind of content, like and subscribe, share it with someone you think might find it interesting, especially if they're interested in economics. And yeah, I hope you have a great day.